And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection. I'm your host, Robert Pictou. Our show today comes to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Tsimshian people. Engaging Indigenous nations and communities is the first step in any shared journey. It involves an exchange of cultures. Therefore, for engagement to be successful, with values of respect, honesty, and humility need to be honored. We begin today's Open Connection with Maynard Angus.
I'm Niska. I come from the Nass Valley. I want to recognize some of my Niska brothers out there, and I was given a name, and the name that was given to me is Skuwiltsikum, which means like a little bear or prince of bears. And the family that I come from, before Alaska became Alaska, it was without borders, and our family would live in and around the coastal areas of where the Nass Valley enters, and Alaska, that is now Alaska, forms. And my family kind of on that boundary line was placed by the Americans, and most of our family ended up on the Alaska side, and our smaller part of the family ended up on the Canadian side. And so because we were a small tribe, the crest was grizzly. And because we were small, we were adopted into the wolf clan, and we're part of the wolf clan, and we became kind of the sub-crest of the wolves. And so I belong, and we recognize our house. We have what is called our Wilp, our house, and the house that I belong to is the house of Wilp Wiskain. And so that kind of a little bit of background. So you hear people telling their stories, and you hear people talking about their culture and who they are, where they came from. And I just want to I wanted to talk about that today. Talk about engagement, and it means so much to so many different people, and everybody has a question about anything, right? So I want to first of all, I want to tell you a story. I've told this story a few times, and for you that have probably heard the story once or twice, or maybe three times, just please bear with me. And I want to tell the story because I just want to kind of set the stage for you and for this conversation. And the story is actually a story that happened to me probably about maybe 8 or 10 years ago. And as Sarah said, my previous tenure before I hung up my shingle was with the Prince Rupert Port Authority. And when I started with the Port Authority, we had lost the pulp mill had gone into bankruptcy. Then, of course, the sawmills closed. And then shortly after, David Anderson, when he was the Ministry of Fisheries, changed policy, license buyback, license stackage. So we had like 2,000 fishing boats in and around the Prince Rupert Harbor and the coast that just literally dwindled to just over 400, which caused this ripple effect of the resource-based economy completely collapsing. And through that time, mom and dad were saying to their children, when you graduate, you go away and get your education and don't come back because there's nothing here. And that truly, really is the way life was in Prince Rupert. And so I was managing a development corporation called Community Futures at the time, and the challenges of trying to manage and bring some resources to the economy that was people were saying, who's going to be the last one to turn off the lights, was really, really difficult. And so I was approached by Don Crisell at the time, and he was the president and CEO of the Prince Rupert Port Authority. And he said, Maynard, I'd like to come and join our team. We're going to grow, and life's going to change, and the port's going to grow, and so forth. Well, I couldn't imagine that because all I saw were for sale signs. And these for sale signs were like really heartbreaking because your friends were leaving town, people you played soccer with, and everybody you knew was kind of literally leaving town. And so when I joined the Port Authority, we had this conversation around the table and talked about what do we do? How do we stop the exodus? How do we keep the kids? How do we change the mind of the public, right? I mean, there's only one way to do that. And I think this forum kind of provides that. The only way you can change the mind of the public is you educate. That's it. You got to educate the people. So we thought, how do we do this? Let's educate the people. So we came up with the concept of an interpretive center. And we threw that around for a few months. And anyways, there's an interpretive center. I went downstairs. We had hired some summer students, and I went downstairs to see how the summer students were doing. And I walked in the back door, and there was a front door, and one of the summer students pointed the finger. Oh, there he is, and playing and ringing. So this gentleman walked over, and I'd never met him in my life. He was from Calgary.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thank you for staying with us. Third space engagement is the act of participating in social interactions in a third space, which is a social environment outside of home and work. Third spaces are places where people can gather, relax, and connect with others. Let us return their conversation as Maynard grapples with a third space question.
Yeah, I'm here from Calgary, and I told that Prince Rupert is going to be the next boom town, and it was in the Globe and Mail, right? I still got the newspaper today. Prince Rupert's going to be a boom town. He says, I have one question for you. He says, we're investors and we want to invest in Prince Rupert, but my question is, why are the Indian people, and see in Alberta they still call us Indians, why are the Indian people having such hard time with the port? Well, I don't know who this guy was, and that caught me off guard. And I kind of thought for a moment, how do I respond to something like that? And so I did. I literally looked down at the floor and thought about what he just asked me. Why are the Indian people having a hard time with the port? So I said, okay, his name was George. I said, okay, George. I said, imagine this. Imagine it was the year 1900, and there was a knock on your door, and it was Mr. Angus. I said, George, I just come from Ottawa, and the government of Canada has granted me your house. I now have the deed here. It says Maynard Angus now owns this home. So you have to move out of the house, and because I'm a nice guy, I'll get you to go live in that little shack in the corner of your lot. I move into your house, and I've got a really, really big family. 100 years go by, so here we are today talking, and your great-great-grandson is recalling the stories that his grandfather told him about the Anguses that are living in George's house that the government of Canada gave to him, but they didn't even sell their house. And so George's great-great-grandson decides to go to the land title office to check it out and see how real this is. So he goes to the land title office, and to his surprise, he discovers that the house that the Anguses are living in still in George's family's name. So he decides to take this to court. Right? I've got a document here that says this is still in George's family's name, and he wins that court case. And the government of Canada granted George's family $100 million. Why? For the loss and the use of that house over the last 100 years. So George's great-grandson sees all the activity that's going on over at that house that the Anguses are living in, and everybody's employed, and they're painting the house, they're replacing the roof, they're doing some landscaping, and everybody's working, and they're just profiting from George's house that he never sold, that the government of Canada gave away. You see where I'm going with this? The lens that we look through is that our house was never sold. So if you're wondering why we're still having this conversation today, is because of this story. We never sold our house. So for those that are trying to wrap their head around this conversation, and it's simple, and it's this, is that we want to work together and we want to make it happen. Yeah, there are some protests here and there, but at the end of the day, And most of you've heard this. First Nation people, Indigenous people are very patient. But for the most part, they're poor when it comes to being money in the bank. So when you create a forum and a platform like this that you can call a third space, because you know what, relationships don't happen in the boardroom. They don't happen in the council chambers. You say that, oh yeah, I've got a great relationship with them. I met with them 20 times in the council chambers and in the boardroom. You do not have a relationship. Relationships happen in a third space, in a place like this, right? In a place where you're going to have coffee and break bread together. That's where they form. Go fishing together, go hunting together, go walking together, go do things together outside of the boardroom, outside of your council chambers. That's where these relationships happen. So one of the questions, and I want to come to you because I want you to ask me the questions, but let me just kind of paint a picture here as well. So when we look across Canada and say, what is common to the First Nations? And I get this question asked to me periodically. What's the difference between the Niska people and the people that live down the line that are called Wet'suwet'en people? What's the difference between you two? Or what's the difference between the Gitxsan people and the Jimsan people? Or the Haida people? What are the differences? Or what's the difference between the Cree and the Ojibwe? What's the difference between the Mi'kmaq and the Niska? What are those differences? You can relate to this. The European people are European, but the cultures are different, right? The Italians are European, but they have their own culture. So are the Germans. They're European people as well. They have their own culture, but they're Europeans.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. Drumming has been and always... Welcome back to Open Connection. Drumming has always been and continues to be an important part of Indigenous communities' traditions and cultural practices. Drums are often considered sacred amongst Indigenous peoples, representing the heartbeat of the people, animals, and Mother Earth herself. Let us return to the conversation with Maynard.
When you look at the Indigenous people in this country, the common threads that we have together is you'll see it on the news, you'll see it in social media. One of them is the drum, right? We beat the drum to call the people, sing our songs, tell our stories. We beat the drum. And the other one too is, and I have talked a little bit about this, and it's a very simple kind of, oh, really? Is shaking hands. If you were to shake hands with a First Nation person, and you got this grip that is so strong, some of you are taught that you got a really good grip. You're going to prove something, right? But for us, we don't have a grip. We've got a soft handshake. So just remember, when you're shaking, doesn't matter where you are, whether you're in Nova Scotia, Ontario, the prairies, British Columbia, we're going to give you a soft handshake. That's who we are, right? Take your time or take your chances. When you want to engage, you got to take your time. How many times have you heard that story? Get to know us. Take your time. Understand who we are. So, common themes, right? Laughing and joking. If somebody is laughing or joking with you, yesterday, I don't remember where we were, somewhere yesterday, and we were at the dinner last night. That's what it was. We were in Kitsim Hall. And the fella's here today, but I jokingly said something. And it was just a really light off the cuff joke, and this person looked at me like, what? And I just smiled. But I was just joking. When we're joking with people, and if you have somebody that's First Nations, they're joking with you, know this. They don't like you. They're joking with you and they're laughing. They want to laugh with you, right? And we like that. Social people. We joke with each other. We laugh with each other, right? So if somebody's joking with you, don't take it, just take it as, oh, they now like me. For the most part, I can say that, yeah, they like me, right? So we talk about common threads and common things, like we like to eat fish, right? We love fish. That's just what happens. We wait for the salmon to come, and that's what we eat. What else is common across the board? Unfortunately, 150,000 plus of our children, our relatives, went to residential school, right? So today across Canada, we're dealing with the aftermath of that unfortunate incident that happened. So my family, some of your family, has gone and has experienced it, and now we're living that life. And the communities, in some cases, the communities, and as you know it, are challenged with trying to deal with those effects. So this is another common thread across the land. And then, if you look back in history, if you go back to 1763, some of you know what that date means. The Royal Proclamation. The Royal Proclamation that was signed off by King George III, and it was kind of drafted up by his influencers. And what does the Royal Proclamation do? Well, the Royal Proclamation basically said that this land in this country is now Crown land. It now belongs to the Crown. And all the Indigenous people, right? Well, they're there, but let's figure out what we're going to do with them. So let's reserve some space for them. Let's put them in these little pots around the country. And so we all have this common thread of like, oh, now we're on the reserve, right? And we joke and say, yeah, I've got a res dog, or I'm from the res. So these common threads that we have across the land and how we tie ourselves together, we're patient. We take our time, get to know us, understand who we are. And for you that are maybe from Alberta, you come into British Columbia, you'll see in Alberta, you've got the Cree Nation. You've got the Northern Cree, you've got the Plains Cree, and this goes right across the country in the prairies. And then you come into British Columbia, well, then all of a sudden there's the Niska, there's the Haida, there's the Wet'suwet'en, there's the Carrier, there's the Clay-Clay-Tene, there's the Haisla, and the list goes on. It doesn't stop. And we each have our own way of being and doing, but we're all kind of living. You go to Prince Rupert, for example, there's 17 different First Nations that live in that city. 17.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Be curious, listen actively, do research, and ask open-ended questions. These are just some of the things you can do to find common ground with someone. In this final part of Open Connection, Maynard shares more about BC Indigenous nations.
So, when you look at British Columbia, there's 600, my numbers might be out here, but I think there's 603 nations, First Nations in Canada. Of that, 1/3 of them reside in British Columbia. If you look at the population of British Columbia, you go to draw a line across our province, and you draw a line between Smithers, you go up to the border. So from Smithers to Haida Gwaii to Bella Bella, in this area, there's about 100,000. You go to Stats Canada, it's about 100,000 people. Of that number, about 40,000 identify them as Indigenous people. So we're very densely populated in this area. In fact, Prince Rupert is one of 3 cities in Canada that is 30% or more of its population is Indigenous. So when you look at Canada and you look at British Columbia and you look at the people that we are, these are common threads. You heard a couple of speakers this morning. You heard Glenn Bennett, Chief Counselor of Haisla, talk about where we follow our mother. We're a matrilineal society. For the most part, most of the communities in and around this area do that. So that kind of tells you, here are some commonalities and what are the differences? Well, the differences are You come into British Columbia, you hear we are on the unceded traditional territory of the nation. So most of British Columbia is unceded territory. You've got Niska, for example, who have our treaty, and you got the Douglas Treaty on Vancouver Island. You got some treaty up in the northern part of the province, but for the most part, this province is unceded, and it lies challenges for the companies that want to do business. Because who do we talk to? Who do we deal with? There's overlapping territories, and that becomes even more challenging because of the overlaps. And so how do we deal with that, right? And so the other kind of differences between the First Nations in British Columbia and those that live, say, in the prairies, for example. Well, if you look at the two provinces, or even the prairies in British Columbia, you'll notice in British Columbia there's a lot of art. We got poles. There's a lot of, you talk about the art that's around here. If you look at what Mel Bevan has done, along with Dempsey Bob as this well-known artists, and you look at the longhouses that they've put together, especially out at Kitsillas Canyon, and you go to the rest of the country and you don't see the art like you do then. And so you say, well, that's really interesting. Nobody really talks about that. Well, a lot of our people, where we are is where we stay, is where we die. We don't move around, so we have time to carve poles. We have time to put this art together. Whereas you look in the prairies, right, they have teepees, and so they're always moving on the land to find the food. Whereas in British Columbia, right, where we are planted, that's where we're going to live. The food's there. We don't go anywhere. We're there. So when you look at these differences between the cultural aspects of how we function and operate and live and so forth, it's interesting to see the art and how it plays out into the communities. So I just wanted to kind of provide that context to you, and then I wanted to open up the floor. I can go on for a little while, but I want to open up the floor and say, some of you probably have a question. So ask Maynard anything. I don't know if I'll be able to answer it, but let me say this. And the reason why I wanted to set the stage like this is because I wanted to explain to you something. In our culture, and in most Indigenous cultures, is we cannot speak for another house. I belong to this Gwiskian, the wolf house. And I cannot, and if there's another wolf house, I can't speak about that house. I can't talk about them. It's not my place. This is like your neighbor. You can't, you have neighbors. You can't talk about Bill and Sally, either what goes on in their house. That's their business. So you don't talk about them.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind and heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.